Good morning. Wow, I think I could have sat in that for another hour, 5 hours. It's really good. My name is Justice, and I am a proud and grateful member of this community. And it's good to be able to be with you today in a different spot, mostly because my left, center, mid spot was getting a little too predictable. I think it's fitting that my parents sat there today. But I keep coming back to this space, these people, every Sunday, because like many, it's where I find enough truth to get me to the next 6 days until I'm back in this space again, until we're back together again. So we are nearing the end of this series, Flawed but Faithful. And in what feels like any great Netflix series, we have entered into the kind of plot twist and character scandal that often leave us with big, wide-mouthed, what? What just happened? Holding on to some questions that we all hope will be answered before the final credits sweep in. But don't worry, just like any great Netflix series, we'll begin today with a recap. Last week, Kelly continued the narrative of Peter, whose flawed, then faithful, then flawed again life seems to be an accurate mirror of our often inconsistent, but well-intentioned, yet contradictory lives. Throughout this storyline, we have come up close and personal to Peter's persistent, jaw-dropping amazement, the complexity of living a life with and loving Jesus, and the doubt and wonder and hope and glimpses of all of that leave him looking out expectantly for what's to come, for him and for all of us. And now for the recap you were promised. Peter has abandoned his life, everything he knew, and signed up to follow a man who promised a journey into a life unknown with some good questions along the way. By this point, Peter had gotten really good at saying yes to his people, his Jesus, even amidst his own doubt and faith-filled question marks. He knew what was real, what was important, what was solid ground, what was faithful. Peter knew these things. He did. Until he didn't. Jesus was arrested, and Peter was unwilling to be the witness in a critical moment where Jesus could have used a few good friends and a few good words on his behalf. Can you imagine how Peter must have felt? How Peter must have felt moments after, when the noise began to die down and the dust began to settle. And his innocent Jesus was now in captivity. I don't think it's hard to imagine whether faith or flaw was prominent in Peter's present. You know, I wonder if flawed crept its way back into the picture as the thoughts that must have been running rampant in Peter's head as he sat in the courtyard, having just fled the scene of the arrest. Maybe the very safety of the stone wall he was sitting on miles away from the chaos, from the betrayal, from the arrest, was the perfect setting for Flawed to make its case why any remnants of faithful that Peter had left should be taken into captivity too. I don't know the man. I wonder if Flawed was Peter choosing to disassociate himself with everything he had learned to be true about Jesus and himself for the sake of security. I don't know the man. I wonder if flawed were the 5 words that fell out of his mouth when Peter forgot how powerful his words were, when he decided comfort was more necessary than solidarity, when he chose to remain in privilege instead of love. I don't know the man. I wonder if these words were still on Peter's tongue long after the rooster crowed, as he looked into a mirror through swollen eyes, wondering who he'd become. And who he'd become without his Jesus, without his real, one, true mirror. I wonder how Peter must have felt when even his best words couldn't clean up the mess he'd gotten himself and his Jesus into, where he's left sitting with the broken remains of a life he hardly even recognizes. I wonder if it's at this point when Peter carefully considers backspacing the faithful part out altogether, leaving the one word that has consumed all of the good in God he once knew: flawed. Sometimes when we are asked to reflect, to wander in the room together, it's about really heavy stuff. Really heavy stuff. And for me, in these moments, I really do just wish everything would pause, even the person speaking in front. I long for everything to freeze so that my mind can catch up with my heart, and so that my heart can catch up with my mind, so that I can really be present. And right now, I want to invite all of us in the room to practice that. I'm aware that silence can be uncomfortable. I get that. But it's my hope that we can all trust that the space it creates will be worthwhile. So, for about 30 seconds to 45 seconds, let's all sit into what Peter's quiet, regretful, uncertain moments must have felt like. Thankfully, the story, our story, does not end there. Today we pick up on the conversation that Jesus starts with Peter, a conversation of redemption. Jesus began the dialogue in the way he almost always does, with a few good questions. The dialogue between Peter and Jesus that we are going to look at today actually occurs after Jesus' crucifixion. It happens long after the famous redemption story that most of us recognize as Easter. The redemptive story that the whole world is always moving towards. Yet still, I wonder if Jesus cares about individual redemption too. Today's conversation is about the redemption of a single flawed but faithful person. The setting of this great and personal turnaround redemption takes place back at the Sea of Galilee, the same place where Jesus' friends and future disciples were fishing with no luck until Jesus implored them to go a little bit deeper, come with him a bit deeper, where they were met with quite the overflowing catch. How fitting. Jesus meets them back in their starting place, back in their beginning. Now, 3 years later, we find Jesus' friends back in the boat doing exactly what they were doing before Jesus interrupted their normal lives of mediocre fishing. Isn't it funny how the disciples return to the familiar and comfort of what they once knew after their Jesus, their purpose giver, was out of the picture? So here, they were in their trusty boats about 100 yards from shore, the seemingly perfect scenario for them to reclaim control and certainty and safety over their flawed lives. When suddenly, they saw a man cooking fish for breakfast on the beach, call out to them asking a perfectly appropriate and normal question. Have you caught anything? Have you caught anything? In which they answered the same way most honest fishermen do, no. The man shouted back, cast your nets on the right side of the boat, and you'll find some. As they did this, their nets filled with so many fish that they were unable to haul in the net. And they knew this man was their Jesus. And not soon after, Peter was running those 100 yards through the water to get to the shore where he could meet his very much living Jesus. I wonder if the disciples recognized the man to be their Jesus, not because of the impossible act, not because of the miracle, but because it was a repeat of what he had done for them before. A sweet reminder that he would continue to show up in their flawed lives, in their paths, in their waters, disrupting their faithless attempts to continue on in the flawed lives that were never meant to be their own. Since it wasn't by Jesus' outward appearance that the disciples recognized him, could it have been by his mannerisms, by his voice, his nature? Following their breakfast reunion on the shore, which I can only imagine was roasted salmon served on everything bagels with cream cheese and capers, Peter encountered another intense and public questioning of where the meter of his heart was pointing. But this time, Jesus was the one asking Peter the questions. And the disciples were the audience. This conversation finds a home in the Gospel of John. Feel free to follow along with me on the screen or on the pages of the Bibles in the center of your tables. It's on page 624. When they finished eating, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Jesus asked the second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon replied, "Yes, Lord, I love you." Jesus said to him, "Take care of my sheep." He asked a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was sad that Jesus had asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" He replied, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." What do you think Jesus is referring to when he says these? And do you love me more than these? At first glance, I thought maybe these fish or these fellow fishermen. But could it be that Jesus is referring to something more internal, something more personal? I think this is the type of wondering that is best done out loud and alongside other people. So in a moment, we're going to gather in groups of 5 or 6 with the people around you. There's some new people in the room today, so thank you for welcoming them into your conversations. When we get into groups, we just talk about the questions that are on the screen for about 3 minutes, and then I'll call you back. There's no real guidelines, just make sure you know everyone's name in your group. And if today you feel like listening as opposed to talking, then know that's completely okay. Whichever feels most natural for you. So what do you think Jesus is referring to when he says these? And do you love me more than these? All right, go. In about one more minute. Those last finishing thoughts. All right. That is it. Go ahead and find your way back to a good place. Thanks everyone for playing. All right. Thanks for being a way for us to more embody what Jesus is trying to say here. I think talking is a great way to do that. All right, so what are some of those words that you guys came up with? What are some of the things you think Jesus is referring to when he says the word these? And do you love me more than these? If you have a bite-sized snippet of what you heard at your table, or maybe something you said, go ahead and call it back up right now. Worldly things. Comfortable things. Material possessions.
The first way I read it was Jesus asking Peter if he loved Jesus more than the other disciples loved him, but rather, I think in your interpretation, do you love me more than everything else?
Everything else. Maybe he's asking, do you love me more than not just the disciples or the fish, but everything else? More than life as you know it. How about one more?
It could be pain and suffering. You know, are you going to continue to kind of wallow in this painful experience, or are you going to go back out and continue to heal?
So Luke said, more than pain and suffering, maybe some of those things that are inevitable in life. Do you love me more than these? So worldly things, comfortable things, material possessions, more than everything else, more than life, more than the pain and sufferings that are bound to come, bound to meet us along the way. You know, I think we could spend weeks filling in synonymous words for these, but I wonder if those words we just called out might be some of the very things that had been keeping Peter from living a life full of love. And further, I wonder if these words we just substituted for these might be the very houses we live in, miles away from scandal and uncertainty. I wonder if the words we substituted might be the roots that we have placed deep down in the control of our life, in the certainty of our life, in a life that isn't moving, stable, certain. I know for myself, most of these are mine to claim, especially as I enter into one of the first big, real transition moments of my life. Along with most undergraduate students, I came into college as a Hokie with joy and hope, ready to begin the process of seeking the career I wanted to pursue and the person I wanted to become. As a lover of questions, most of the time these past 4 years, I have spent wondering aloud some really big ones. Questions like, who am I? What am I supposed to do with my life? And further, do I get a choice in who I am? Do I really get a choice in what I'm doing with my life? Some really simple questions for a 20-something-year-old to answer. These are big questions, big ones. Questions that without the right self-talk and support can lead you to a place that is wanting nothing to do with those questions or the answers altogether. A place that is dark and lonely and leads you to fall in love with anything and everything that is still, certain, not moving, not growing, stable. And how does Jesus respond to us when we are caught up in a life full of loving bees? He says, "Feed my sheep." When I first read this, I had so many questions built around trying to find any meaningful connection between loving and feeding. The first thing that came to my head was Chipotle because, well. But really, when I thought about feeding's connection to love, I thought, well, why is feeding necessary? Why is feeding necessary? This one's a response question, so go ahead and respond. Why is feeding necessary? To stay alive. Growth. Community. Human connection. All of those things, maybe. Feeding results in nutrients, vitamins, energy, growth, sustainability, life. Then I wondered if feeding could be an act of love. And what I know is that feeding requires closeness, consistency, relationship, human connection, and time. In regards to a baby and its parent, feeding is one of the first ways that they show their love to that baby, longing to keep that baby moving towards all that is life, even though that baby's life and the direction it will soon take is uncertain to all of them. When I think back to my story, I think about the people along the way that have fed me. Not by giving me answers to my questions, but by gently returning the questions to me that I had thrown away. The friends who have urged me to continue walking towards that unknown. To chew on the big questions until they became bite-sized. To make goals. To allow all of my uncertainty and doubt and fear to be the very food that I needed all along in order to walk towards loving people and myself throughout all of my transitions. Maybe Jesus asked Peter if he loved him 3 times because he knew the shame and guilt and tears that came with Peter denying Jesus 3 times. Maybe Jesus' questions weren't a test for Peter to prove his loyalty, but rather a reminder that Jesus would use to remind Peter who Peter was. Maybe by Peter answering Jesus' questions, he was reaffirming his very truth, his identity, his calling, that had gotten tossed out when he began to focus all of his energy on flawed. Maybe Jesus really did know the power of saying those 3 words aloud and what it would mean for Peter to be the one saying them. Could it be that Jesus was reminding his friend Peter that would no doubt screw it up along the way again? That he was meant for more than just his old life. He had work to do. He had a purpose. Could it be that Jesus was calling him not to be only a fisher of people, but a feeder of people? I wonder why Jesus would entrust a flawed but faithful, ex-mediocre fisherman and his crew to carry on all of his work on earth. Unless Jesus was going to continue meeting his friends through all of his creation. Could it be that Jesus had plans for his friends to feed other people and also be fed by those very people that they were feeding? Could it be that while God may not need us, he chooses to need us? If so, just like Peter, we are all worthy to continue holding the title of not flawed but faithful, but flawed and faithful. So will we let ourselves be? Amen. So just like Jesus cared about Peter's personal returning, Peter's redemption, I wonder if God also cares about all of our individual storylines, all of the places that we are at and the questions that we are asking ourselves, and the place that he wants to take us, which I know is towards life and love. So today, in place of communion, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to take some time just to reflect individually. There will be a few questions that appear on the screen behind us, in front of you, and you can take that time however you need it. You can visit the prayer rail, light a candle. You can take a scroll on your table, write a prayer, and stick it in the prayer wall in the back of the room. Or you can just sit in your seat and think, and just think. So take that time. After about 3 or 4 minutes, Brian will come up and he'll invite us into something more communal and something that we can all do together. So take this moment and enter it in whatever way you need to. Just make sure you enter it.